The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the streets of Portland into rivers of oily reflection. Streetlights flickered weakly through the downpour, bleeding amber across the fog that clung to the old neighborhoods. On Hawthorne Street, a police cruiser sat idling in front of a 2-story Victorian house with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. Inside that house lay a body. Detective Samuel Crane stood at the gate, coat collar up, cigarette glowing beneath the brim of his hat. The call had come in at dawn. An attended death, possible homicide. Locked room. Crane had heard those words before, but rarely did they mean what they suggested. A locked room was almost never truly locked. There was always a loose latch, a second exit, a trick of perception. Almost always. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood and dust. The wallpaper was faded, the air cold as a cellar. 2 uniformed officers stood awkwardly by the staircase, whispering like altar boys afraid to breathe too loud. Upstairs, one of them said, pointing with his chin. No sign of forced entry. Door was locked from the inside. Windows too. Crane ascended slowly, his shoes leaving dark prints on the old carpet. The door to the master bedroom stood at the end of the hall, a heavy oak thing with a brass knob. A crime scene technician was crouched beside it, frowning. The key was still in the lock, she murmured. Inside, Crane entered the room. The victim, a man in his 40s, lay sprawled beside the bed, one hand stretched toward the wall. There were no visible wounds, no blood. The expression on his face was frozen between confusion and terror. On the nightstand sat a glass of water half full, and a silver pocket watch that had stopped at 2:17 a.m. The window was sealed shut from within. The air vent was too small for anything larger than a rat. No footprints except the victim's. It was, in every practical sense, impossible. Crane walked to the body and crouched down. The man's eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. His fingertips were blackened, slightly burned marks. He leaned closer. There was a faint smell in the aerozone, like after a lightning strike. Any idea who found him? Crane asked. His sister replied, Officer Duggan. She came by this morning. Said he hadn't answered her calls. We had to break the front door lock to get in. Bedroom door was still locked from the inside when we arrived. Crane looked at the walls. Old, thick plaster. A painting of a ship in a storm. A bookshelf with outdated encyclopedias. Nothing disturbed, no sign of struggle, and yet something felt wrong. The silence of the house had weight to it, as though it was holding its breath. He studied the door frame closely. The screws were old but recently polished. The hinges had scratches, tiny, deliberate ones. He took out a small flashlight, ran the beam along the seam between the door and the frame, and saw it. A sliver of metal embedded into the wood, almost invisible, a mechanism. Get me a screwdriver, Crane said quietly. When he pried the sliver loose, a spring snapped, and something inside the lock clicked. It wasn't a normal locking system, it was custom. Someone had built a secondary catch, one that could engage automatically when the door closed, a self-locking trap. The detective straightened slowly. He didn't lock himself in, he muttered. Someone wanted it to look that way. The room suddenly seemed smaller. The hum of rain outside grew louder, echoing like distant static. He turned toward the window and noticed condensation on the glass. 2 sets of fingerprints, faint but clear. One belonged to the victim. The other was larger. And then, just as he leaned closer to examine them, the hallway light flickered once, then went out. For a heartbeat, the entire house plunged into darkness. A sound echoed from downstairs, a single, deliberate creak, as if a footstep pressed against an old wooden floorboard. When the lights came back on, the fingerprints on the glass were gone. Crane froze, staring at the clean window pane. It was impossible. No one had entered or left, yet something or someone had been there. He turned toward the hallway, listening. The air was still again, but he could swear he heard breathing somewhere in the house. A slow, measured breath. And that was when he noticed it, the faintest draft of cold air brushing against his cheek, coming not from the window, but from the wall behind the bookshelf. He stepped closer, A hollow sound echoed when he tapped the wood. There was something inside the wall, and it was moving. For a long moment, Detective Samuel Crane didn't move. The faint draft brushed against his cheek again, cool, steady, almost like breathing. The room behind him was silent except for the soft ticking of the dead man's stopwatch, marking time that no longer existed. Crane's eyes narrowed as he studied the bookshelf. It was built into the wall, painted over more than once, but the edges along the right side were uneven, and there were scuff marks on the floor as if it had been moved recently. He pressed his palm flat against the wood. "Hollow, Duggan," he called softly. "Get me a crowbar." The officer hesitated at the door. "Sir, if it's load-bearing, just do it." When the tool came, Crane wedged it behind the lowest shelf and leaned his weight forward. With a groan and a puff of dust, the entire structure shifted outward half an inch. The smell that followed was old earth, mold, and something faintly metallic, like rust and decay. Behind the shelf was a narrow slit of darkness. Crane shone his flashlight inside, a passage, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, lined with crumbling brick and tangled with cobwebs. The beam of light disappeared into blackness after 6 or 7 feet. He ducked inside. The space was colder than the rest of the house, the air thick and wet. Each step he took echoed off the brick walls like a whisper. Dust coated everything, yet there were footprints, fresh ones. Small, narrow, perhaps from a woman's shoes. He followed them. The passage turned left, then ended abruptly at a wooden panel. He pushed it. It didn't budge. When he pressed his ear against it, he heard faint humming from the other side, machinery, or perhaps electricity. He went back to the bedroom, his mind racing. The victim's blackened fingertips, the faint smell of ozone, the stopwatch. Something electrical had happened in that room. Something precise. Crane turned to the technician. "Get forensics down here again. Check every outlet, every wire. That passage, see where it leads outside. I want this whole place mapped." She nodded and left. The detective stood alone again, eyes drifting toward the dead man's face. There was a kind of terror in the expression, yes, but not surprise, as if the victim had expected what was coming. On the nightstand lay a folded newspaper. The headline, "Local engineer receives government contract." Crane glanced at the byline dated 3 weeks earlier. The victim's name was underlined in pen. Robert Miles. An engineer, a designer of systems. Crane exhaled slowly. "You built the trap that killed you," he murmured. He sat in a nearby chair, studying the room's geometry, the distances, the line of sight from bed to door, to window, to wall. It all felt deliberate, mathematical. And then something caught his eye. On the far wall, above the baseboard, a faint crack ran horizontally across the plaster. He knelt and brushed away dust. It wasn't a crack. It was a seam. He pressed the edge with his thumb, and a hidden compartment opened with a click. Inside was a narrow metal box, the size of a book. He opened it. Inside the box, a small schematic drawing, a Polaroid photograph of a woman, and a letter, folded once, stained with what looked like dried coffee. The schematic was a design for an electromagnetic locking system, the same kind of mechanism he'd found inside the doorframe. The letter, in elegant cursive, read, "You said no one would get hurt, Robert. But someone always does. I'm leaving tonight. Don't try to find me." It was unsigned. The Polaroid showed a woman in her 30s, sharp-featured, dark hair pulled back, eyes distant. On the back was written, "El, July 3, 1987. Crane felt the weight of something familiar. That date was 3 nights ago. He pocketed the photo and schematic, then turned as the floorboards creaked again, this time from somewhere below. The sound repeated, slow, deliberate, someone moving through the house. Crane motioned for Duggan, who reappeared with his gun drawn. Together they followed the sound down the staircase. The lights flickered again as thunder cracked outside. The sound led them to the basement door. It was open just slightly, and beyond it, the black mouth of the cellar breathed cold air upward. Crane descended first, his flashlight cutting through dust motes. The basement was larger than expected. Stone walls, shelves filled with old tools, boxes, and electrical components. Then his light found something that made him stop. In the far corner stood a wooden chair with leather restraints fixed to the arms. A small generator sat beside it, its cables snaking across the floor. The generator was still humming. Crane's pulse quickened. He crouched beside it, studying the setup. Two copper wires led upward through the floorboards straight toward the master bedroom. The chair had scorch marks on its armrests. Jesus, Duggan whispered. What the hell is this? Crane didn't answer. His gaze drifted to a faint outline on the floor. Dust swept aside recently, as if something heavy had been dragged away. And then he noticed the shoe print next to it, the same narrow size as in the passage upstairs. He turned his flashlight toward the far wall, where a second passage seemed to vanish into blackness. This one wasn't bricked, it had been freshly dug, the edges raw and wet with mud. Crane stepped closer, squinting into the darkness. The air from within was colder still. Something glimmered deep inside the tunnel, something metallic, reflecting the flashlight's beam. He took one cautious step forward, and then the generator snapped to life again. The lights flickered violently, and every tool in the basement rattled as if pulled by a magnetic force. The air filled with a low hum, like the sound of a machine awakening after years of silence. Crane raised his arm to shield his face, shouting for Duggan to cut the power, but when the hum stopped, the tunnel was empty. The glimmering object was gone, and on the basement wall, scrawled in black soot, a single word had appeared: run. Crane stared at it, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know whether it was a warning or a threat. By the time the storm eased over Portland, dawn had turned the sky into a pale bruise. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, streaking the windows of the police precinct. As Detective Samuel Crane stood by the evidence board, cigarette unlit between his fingers, pinned to the cork were photographs of the Hawthorne Street house, the dead man, the locked door, the strange mechanism from the frame. But Crane's eyes kept drifting back to the Polaroid of the woman labeled the he had seen that face before. Not in a file, not in a mugshot, but somewhere else. Somewhere recent. He opened a drawer and pulled out the city's database forms. Missing persons. Week by week, halfway down the stack he found it. Evelyn Locke, age 34, freelance engineer. Reported missing 4 days ago. Last seen leaving a local bar downtown called the Switchyard. Crane exhaled slowly. The same initials. The same face. He turned toward Duggan, who was nursing coffee at the next desk. I want every detail on this woman. Where she worked, who she knew, and what she was building with Robert Miles. Duggan nodded. Already on it. She worked for a private contracting firm, Yontech Systems. Mostly experimental design, electronic security, energy devices, heavy tech. Any history between her and Miles? They were partners for a few years. Word is it got messy. Romantic, maybe. No one's sure. Crane's eyes returned to the Polaroid. Evelyn's expression in the photo wasn't one of fear or affection, it was distance, calculation. The look of someone who understood exactly how things worked, including people. He flicked the cigarette into the ashtray and reached for his coat. Let's pay Yontech a visit. The company occupied a converted warehouse near the docks, a gray block of concrete and steel surrounded by puddles that mirrored the low sky. Inside, the air smelled of metal shavings and ozone, a faint electric tang that made Crane's skin prickle. A man in a lab coat met them at the entrance. We're cooperating with the investigation, Detective, he said stiffly. But Evelyn's disappearance took us by surprise. She was brilliant, unpredictable. But brilliant, what kind of work did she do here? Crane asked. Prototype systems. Electromagnetic locking mechanisms, remote triggers, kinetic traps. Things most people don't even understand yet. Robert Miles was her mentor, until she surpassed him. Crane's gaze drifted to a row of metal cabinets. Inside one, he saw dozens of circuit boards, coils of copper wire, and stacks of hand-drawn schematics. Did she ever mention someone threatening her? The man hesitated. No, But she did talk about guilt. Said she'd made something she shouldn't have. Something that could kill. Do you know what it was? He shook his head. Only that she called it the mirror lock, a system that uses electromagnetic feedback loops. Once triggered, it seals a space completely. No exit, no escape. Crane felt his chest tighten. And how do you turn it off? She never told anyone. Back at the precinct, the evidence felt heavier now, every photograph, every diagram, like pieces of a riddle that refused to fit. Crane studied the schematic again. It wasn't just a lock, it was a trap, one that could be armed, remotely activated from anywhere within the wiring of a house. The generator in the basement, the metal traces in the walls. Someone had turned Miles's invention against him. But why? He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. The faint hum of the fluorescent light above sounded almost like the one in the basement. He opened his eyes again and froze. On his desk, next to the Polaroid, lay a new object, a small silver coin. He hadn't put it there. Stamped across its surface was a symbol he didn't recognize, two overlapping triangles inside a circle. Round the edge were etched the words, "Forgive nothing." "Duggan," he said quietly, "who came into my office?" "No one," the officer replied. "I was right here." Crane picked up the coin. It was cold. Too cold, as if it had been refrigerated. The underside was slightly magnetized. It clung faintly to the metal edge of his desk. He turned it in his fingers, and a sliver of memory surfaced. A coin like this had appeared once before, years ago, in a case that had gone unsolved. A lab accident that wasn't an accident. Same symbol, same metallic chill. He slid the coin into an evidence bag. His instincts screamed that this wasn't coincidence. That night, Crane returned alone to the Hawthorne Street house. The police tape fluttered in the wind. The house itself seemed darker now, drained of all warmth. He entered quietly, the floor creaking beneath his steps. The generator in the basement was gone, vanished. Only the scorch marks remained upstairs. The bedroom felt colder than before. His flashlight cut across the empty floorboards, and then, without warning, the door behind him closed. He spun, hand go into his gun. The latch clicked. He tried the knob. Locked. He hadn't touched it. The window pane shimmered faintly, reflecting his own face. The air filled again with that low electric hum. On the mirror above the dresser, letters began to appear, written from the inside of the glass. Glowing faintly blue, "She's still here." Crane's breath caught. He turned slowly toward the wall where the bookshelf had been. The hollow sound came again. But this time, it wasn't air moving. It was footsteps. From inside the wall. He drew his gun and stepped forward as a soft, deliberate voice whispered from the darkness beyond the plaster, "You shouldn't have come back, detective." The flashlight flickered once and went out. Darkness swallowed the room whole. The flashlight had died mid-breath, leaving only the faint pulse of electricity in the walls, a low, almost living hum. Detective Samuel Crane stood motionless, every nerve drawn taut, listening for that whisper again. But the house was silent now. Too silent. He reached for the switch on his flashlight, tapped it once, twice, nothing. He slipped a hand into his coat pocket and found his lighter. The tiny flame flared weakly, throwing trembling orange light across the bedroom. The words on the mirror were gone. The glass was clean again, reflecting only his own face, pale, drawn, eyes that looked like they belonged to someone older. He turned toward the bookshelf, or rather, where it had been. The cavity behind it yawned like an open wound in the wall. A smell drifted out, dust, oil, and something faintly organic, like rot trapped beneath plaster. He crouched and aimed the lighter's flame into the gap. The tunnel beyond was darker than pitch, lined with exposed brick and wires that ran like veins. The hum grew louder when he leaned closer, as if the house were breathing in response to his proximity. Then a whisper, so close it seemed to come from his ear itself. "Do you believe in echoes, detective?" Crane's pulse slammed in his chest. He rose slowly, gun raised, eyes darting across the room. "Who's there?" His own voice sounded small, devoured by the space. No reply. only the faint hiss of rain against the windows. He backed toward the door, reached for the knob, still locked. It refused to move, though he could feel the metal trembling faintly beneath his hand. Something mechanical ticked inside the frame. He looked down. Beneath the door, a sliver of light was visible. A shadow moved past it, slow, deliberate. Someone was in the hallway. He aimed his weapon at the door and waited. A single heartbeat stretched into 5, 10. The light under the door flickered once, then went out completely. The house exhaled. Then the whisper returned, but this time it came from behind him. He spun, lighter flaring brighter from the sudden rush of air. The flame revealed something new on the far wall, a shape drawn crudely in charcoal, maybe soot, maybe blood. Two triangles overlapping in a circle, the same symbol from the coin, and beneath it, for words, forgive nothing, she waits. The lighter guttered and died. Crane stood in total darkness, breath uneven. He could hear the rain outside again, or was that static? He couldn't tell anymore. He pressed his shoulder against the wall and slid sideways until his fingers found the bookshelf cavity again. The air coming from it was colder now. There was no light, no sound until he heard a distant metallic clink. Something dropped inside the passage. He crouched, stretching his arm inside the gap until his fingertips brushed metal. He pulled it out slowly. Another coin. Same symbol. Same impossible chill, except this one was wet. When he brought it closer to the lighter's faint remaining ember, he saw it, a sneer of red across its surface. Blood, fresh. He stood up fast, scanning the room again, heart hammering. Evelyn, he shouted into the walls. His voice echoed, distorted, splitting into layers. One echo came back immediately. Another a second later, lower, slower, as if spoken by someone else. Evelyn, the echo said back, not repeating, responding. He froze. A long, dragging sound came from inside the walls, footsteps, or hands scraping brick. The plaster bulged slightly, like something pressing outward from the other side. He fired once into the wall. The sound exploded through the house, dust raining from the ceiling. When the echo of the gunshot faded, silence returned, then a voice, softer now, almost pleading, "You're too late, Samuel." It was a woman's voice. Calm, controlled. He lowered the gun slowly, stepping closer to the wall. "Evelyn," a pause. Then, very faintly, "You can't free in." The sound faded like smoke. Crane pressed his palm flat against the plaster. It was worn. A second later, it pulsed beneath his skin, one slow heartbeat. He stumbled back, chest tight, mind racing. What if the system Miles and Evelyn built wasn't just mechanical? What if it was alive, an experiment that blurred the line between machine and mind? He had seen strange things in his career, obsession, madness, brilliance twisted by guilt, but never this. His lighter sparked again, casting light across the room just as the bedroom door creaked open behind him. A figure stood in the doorway, a woman in a soaked gray coat, hair clinging to her face, eyes wide but unreadable. She looked exactly like the woman from the photograph. "Detective Crane," she said quietly, "you shouldn't have come here alone." He raised the gun. "Evelyn, walk." She nodded once. He thought he could contain it. He was wrong. "What did you build, Evelyn?" Crane demanded. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. The lock clicked again by itself, trapping them both inside. Her gaze flicked toward the wall. "It's listening," she whispered, "and it remembers everything." Crane felt the hair rise on his neck. "What is it?" She turned toward him slowly, and the light caught her face. For the first time, he saw fear, genuine, bone deep. "The thing that killed Robert wasn't me," she said. "It was the machine. And now it wants you." Before he could respond, every bulb in the room shattered at once. Sparks fell like rain. In the brief strobe of light, he saw Evelyn's silhouette jerk backward, pulled toward the wall as if by invisible hands. "Evelyn!" he shouted, lunging forward. But she was gone. Only the faint hum remained, and on the floor where she had stood lay the silver coin, still spinning until it settled, symbol facing up. "Forgive nothing." Crane stared at it, heart-racing realization dawning that the killer might not even be human, or worse, might be something born from human guilt itself. From the wall came one final whisper, low and mocking, "We're not done, detective." Rain pounded against the window panes of the old mansion like an endless drumbeat. The entire house seemed to breathe with it, the boards expanding, sighing, settling into the weight of years. Detective Aaron Holt stood in the parlor, the faint light from his flashlight tracing the edges of the furniture covered in dusty sheets. The air smelled faintly metallic, as if something old and mechanical had recently stirred after decades of silence. He had returned to the crime scene alone. The others had grown restless. The forensics team swore there was nothing left to find. But Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was withholding something, as if it were alive and waiting. The murder of Evelyn Grant hadn't been about rage or passion. It was a design, a precise act of control. He turned toward the far wall, the one that had first drawn his attention that morning, smooth plaster, but uneven, almost imperceptibly warped. He ran his hand along it, cold to cold. A hollow echo followed his touch. Something metallic rang deep within. His pulse quickened. From the corner of the room, under an old carpet, he noticed a hairline crack. He knelt down and pulled the edge of the carpet back. There, hidden beneath decades of dust, was a rectangular outline in the wooden floor, a hatch perfectly fitted, flush with the boards. He hesitated, glancing toward the door, then exhaled slowly and pulled. The hatch opened with a reluctant groan. A waft of cold, stale air rushed upward, smelling of rust and oil. Beneath him, a narrow shaft disappeared into darkness. He pointed the flashlight down a metal ladder, descended into what looked like a crawl space filled with old wiring, gears, and something else. Something that shimmered faintly. Aaron descended, each step echoing hollowly. The light wavered over a tangle of steel rods, pulleys, and cogs that stretched under the floor like veins. It wasn't just wiring, it was a mechanism, a hidden construct running beneath the entire house. He realized then, the room with no doors wasn't a riddle of architecture. It was a system. He found a control box bolted into the wall, its face covered with faded labels and a single red lever. A tag read WR, Master Release. The initials meant nothing to him, yet they sparked a memory, the deed of the house he'd seen in records earlier that day. The original owner's name, William Reddick, a clockmaker. Aaron's breath caught. Reddick had vanished in 1952, leaving behind no trace. The house, built by his own hands, had been known locally as the timekeeper's home. Locals whispered it was cursed, gears still turning in its walls long after Reddick's death. He reached for the lever, hesitated, then pulled. A deep, shuddering groan rippled through the house above. The ceiling creaked, walls seemed to sigh. Somewhere upstairs, something heavy slid across the floor. A hidden passage, perhaps, or something worse. Aaron scrambled up the ladder, emerging back into the parlor. The room had changed. The furniture was no longer covered. The dust seemed disturbed. But what froze him was the painting on the wall, a portrait of Evelyn Grant that hadn't been there before. Her eyes followed him with uncanny precision, and her mouth, slightly open, seemed to whisper his name. He stepped closer. The painting wasn't new, it looked aged, as if it had always been there. And below the frame, etched faintly into the wood, were the same initials. W.R. Aaron backed away, pulse racing. The lever had awakened something, not just machinery, but memory. The house remembered. And as he turned to leave, he noticed the door he'd entered through was gone. Smooth wall, seamless plaster. The house had closed him in. From somewhere beneath his feet, the gears began to turn again, slowly, deliberately. A whisper of metal and breath. He realized, too late, that the killer hadn't needed to escape the room that night. The room itself had done it for him. The mansion was silent now, yet the silence was thicker, heavier, as if it were pressing against Detective Aaron Holt's chest. Every step he took echoed unnaturally, each creak of the wooden floorboards sounding like a whispered warning. The storm outside had finally subsided, leaving the streets of Seattle slick and dim under a pale, washed-out morning light. But inside the house, it felt as though time had stopped entirely. Aaron moved cautiously through the parlor. The walls seemed to pulse subtly, almost imperceptibly, like the steady beat of a heart. The air smelled faintly of burnt metal and oil. The control lever he had pulled earlier, the one labeled WR Master Release, weighed on his mind. He had triggered something, but what? And why did it feel alive, almost sentient? He returned to the room where Robert Miles had died. The bedroom door was still sealed from the inside, the lock mechanism faintly humming, vibrating like a low-frequency pulse. The bed was untouched, the glass of water still half full, yet the faint trace of blackened fingertips lingered in the dust along the floorboards, as if the room itself remembered the last moment of life it had held. Aaron crouched, running his hand along the wall beside the bed. There, hidden in the paint layers, was another scene. This one was finer than the first, almost invisible. He pressed it lightly, and a thin panel slid open, revealing a narrow shaft lined with copper wiring. The wires twisted into coils and fed into small mechanical modules embedded behind the walls. It was all connected: the bedroom, the basement, the hidden passage. Every element was part of an intricate system designed not merely to trap, but to manipulate, and, most terrifyingly, to observe. Aaron's mind raced. Robert Miles had been an engineer, Evelyn Grant his partner, and William Reddick the original architect of the house's mechanisms. The chain of obsession spanned decades. Reddick had vanished, leaving behind his mechanical legacy. Miles and Grant had pushed it further, experimenting with electromagnetic locks, automated traps, and fail-safes that seemed almost alive. He followed the copper wiring through the narrow shaft, moving carefully to avoid disturbing it. The wires hummed faintly, a soft electrical murmur that seemed to vibrate through his fingertips. And then, near the floorboards, he noticed something unexpected: a series of etch symbols, similar to those he had seen on the silver coins, overlapping triangles within a circle. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't just a trap or a lock. It was a system of messages, a language designed by someone obsessed with control and secrecy. The house itself was a messenger, a recorder, a silent witness to human folly. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from above, a slow, deliberate tapping, like footsteps. Aaron froze. It was too light to be a person moving normally. It was measured, precise, mechanical almost. He ascended the staircase slowly, each step a calculated risk. The parlor stretched before him, and in the center, where dust had settled, was a new mark on the floor, a circle scratched deeply into the wood, symbolically identical to the ones in the wall and on the coins. Aaron knelt to inspect it. The scratches were fresh. Someone or something had been here. From behind him, the whisper came again, low, cold, metallic. "You see now, detective. Everything is connected." He spun, gun drawn, but saw no one. Only shadows, stretching unnaturally, twisting with the flickering light of the single exposed bulb overhead. Then a soft, measured clatter sounded from the wall where the bookshelf had been. The hollow sound pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. Aaron pressed his palm against the plaster. Warm, vibrating, alive, a voice, unmistakably human, whispered directly into his ear, though no one was there. "The builder watches. The engineer obeys. The apprentice learns." Aaron staggered back, mind spinning. The words made no literal sense, yet carried the weight of warning. He noticed the faint reflection of movement in the cracked glass of the mirror above the dresser. A shadow, not his own. It moved with intent, curling toward the bedroom wall. The metallic hum grew louder. The entire house seemed to vibrate in response, the walls subtly undulating, the floorboards trembling under his feet. He realized, with a sinking certainty, that the mechanisms were not just traps, but extensions of their creators' minds, a layered consciousness of obsession, paranoia, and vengeance embedded into steel, copper, and plaster. Aaron took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He needed to understand the system before it claimed him as it had claimed Miles. He moved closer to the wall, examining the seam, and tapped it lightly with his fingers. The wall shifted slightly. A hidden latch clicked. A panel opened, revealing a small compartment. Inside lay a worn notebook bound in leather, brittle with age. The cover was stamped with the initials WR. He opened it. Inside were meticulous diagrams, mechanical formulas, and handwritten notes describing sequences of locks, electromagnetic pulses, and fail-safe triggers. But the last page made him pause. Scrawled in near-illegible handwriting were 3 words: "It remembers everything." A chill ran down his spine. The machine, the house itself, was aware, and it remembered. Then, from the ceiling above, a single floorboard shifted. A heavy, deliberate creak. Aaron looked up and froze, for a shadow moved across the ceiling, defying gravity. Silent and deliberate. "You shouldn't have come back." A whisper that was not carried by air, but seemed embedded in the walls themselves. And somewhere deep beneath the mansion, the mechanisms started again. Gears grinding faintly, pulleys spinning, as if awakening from a long, patient slumber. Aaron's heart hammered in his chest. He understood now. The house wasn't just a trap. It was a witness, a participant, and he had just become its newest subject. Detective Aaron Holt leaned against the warped wall, listening as the mansion exhaled around him. Every creak of the floor, every hum from the hidden gears beneath his feet, resonated with the same precision, the same obsessive intent that had characterized the house for decades. He knew now the truth that had eluded him for hours or perhaps days. The line between human and machine had blurred here. Above him, the shadow had vanished. Below, the faint grinding of mechanisms persisted, slow, deliberate, almost patient. Holt's fingers traced the seam along the wall once more, careful not to disturb the delicate balance. The hidden latch slid easily under his touch, revealing another cavity. Inside, the series of letters and photographs lay stacked neatly, each one marked with a symbol he had come to recognize. Overlapping triangles inside a circle. He picked up a photograph. Evelyn Grant, younger, holding a mechanical device, the same device that had formed the heart of the trap. The expression on her face was no longer the calm control he had first seen. There was urgency there, fear, and the shadow of guilt. Below the photograph was a letter, partially yellowed, its cursive handwriting precise yet unsteady. Robert believed he could control the system. He was wrong. The machine learns, it sees, it waits for the one who dares to awaken it. I am the only one who knows its limits. The apprentice. Aaron froze. The apprentice? The term repeated itself in his mind, a key to the puzzle he had been circling all along. There was someone else, someone who had taken the house's lessons, learned its mechanics, and refined them. Suddenly, from the corner of the room, a figure emerged. Aaron's gun rose automatically, but the silhouette was oddly familiar. A woman, drenched, hair plastered to her face, eyes sharp and cold. "Evelyn Grant, I knew you would follow," she said, voice steady but edged with tension. "I had to make sure you understood." Aaron's grip on the weapon didn't falter. "You set all of this up, Robert Miles? The room, the traps, the basement, all of it?" Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No, he designed the beginnings. I completed it. The locks, the passages, the feedback loops. I learned from him, refined the machine. But I never intended for it to kill." Her eyes flickered with a shadow of pain. "He underestimated it. He underestimated me." Aaron took a cautious step forward. "Then why the body? Why the mechanism in the bedroom?" Evelyn's lips pressed thinly. "He was careless. I warned him. He tried to prove mastery. The room, it remembered. It remembers every interaction, every hand that touches it. The machine killed him because he tampered beyond what I had calibrated. And now," she paused, letting her gaze sweep the room, "it will not let you leave until it's satisfied." Aaron's stomach sank. "Satisfied? What do you mean?" Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "The house is a judge, and you are its witness. You've seen too much to leave. It will not forgive you for ignorance. He glanced at the bedroom door, still locked, still humming softly. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if the house itself were inhaling. Holt realized then that Evelyn's presence wasn't entirely comforting. She knew the limits of the machine, but she was part of it now. She had become the apprentice, the only human capable of controlling what the house demanded. The hum from below grew louder. Gears spinning, pulleys tightening. The air vibrated with mechanical anticipation. Holt understood in a single moment that the system had evolved. It was no longer passive, no longer just a set of locks and wires. It reacted. It learned from every movement, every step, every thought. Aaron swallowed hard. Then you are the killer. Evelyn's eyes met his, unflinching. I am the apprentice, she said. I did not kill Robert, but I finished what the house began. I am its guardian, its executor, its judge. A cold draft blew through the room, stirring dust and faint whispers from the walls. The hidden passage behind the bookshelf creaked again. Aaron stepped back instinctively. Gun raised, Evelyn's hand went to a small panel in her coat. With deliberate care, she pressed a sequence of buttons. The bedroom door clicked once, then swung open silently. Aaron's heart raced. You could let me go. She nodded faintly. If the machine allows it. From the walls came a low, resonant hum of voice, almost human, almost mechanical, rising in timbre. The entire house seemed to vibrate in response to Evelyn's movements. She glanced at Aaron, eyes hard. You've seen too much. But I can guide it. I can contain it. Robert couldn't. I can. The machine's hum rose to a deafening pitch, the floors trembling under their feet. For a single, terrifying instant, the room seemed alive, observing, deciding, and then silence. Aaron lowered his gun slightly. He realized with a chill that Evelyn Grant had become more than human in this house. She was its operator, its conscience, its will. The apprentice revealed. But somewhere in the shadows of the walls a faint metallic pulse continued, like a heartbeat. The house had not finished its judgment. Detective Aaron Holt sat in the parlor, the weight of the mansion pressing down on him like a living thing. Evelyn Grant stood across the room, her arms folded, eyes scanning the walls as if reading invisible lines of text. The faint hum of hidden mechanisms reverberated under their feet, the pulse of the house itself. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of air through the seams, seemed to carry a message. Aaron studied Evelyn, trying to parse the woman from the apprentice she had become. Her expression was calm, yet every movement suggested acute awareness. The way she tilted her head toward the faintest sound, how her fingers twitched as if anticipating the house's reaction. She was both human and something else now, inseparable from the machinery that had claimed Robert Miles. You control it, Aaron said quietly. You can stop it from killing again. Evelyn shook her head. I don't control it. I guide it. The house is patient. It watches. It waits for mistakes. I am the buffer, the one it trusts to enforce its judgment. But even I cannot command it fully. A sudden vibration ran through the floor. Aaron stumbled slightly, eyes darting to the ceiling. The walls whispered faintly, metallic tones weaving into a chilling symphony. The room will always remember, Evelyn continued. Every step, every handprint, every thought. You can't hide from it. You can't lie. It is the silent witness to everything. Robert thought he could manipulate it. He was wrong. He paid the price. Aaron glanced at the bedroom door, now closed and sealed once more. The humming had intensified, almost conversational, rising and falling like a voice beneath the plaster. His mind raced. The house wasn't just a trap or a series of locks. It was a repository, an entity that recorded, judged, and executed consequences. And the coins? He asked, holding up the silver piece he had found earlier. The symbol glinted under the flickering bulb. They are markers, Evelyn said. Warnings, messages, indicators. The house uses them to communicate, to test its subjects. If it leaves one for you, it is considering your actions carefully. Aaron swallowed. And what about me? The lever, the passages, everything. Am I a subject or a target? Evelyn's gaze hardened. A little of both. You've seen too much to leave untested. But the house will decide, not I. You must move carefully. Watch and listen. The walls see. The floors remember. The air carries your truth. A distant sound caught Aaron's attention. A slow scraping, like metal against metal, echoing from behind a wall. His heart thumped violently. He raised his gun. Evelyn's hand touched his arm, steadying him. Wait, she whispered. It's observing. That is its way. Be silent. Move slowly. Do not provoke it. Aaron did as instructed, inching toward the bookshelf cavity. The passage beyond remained dark, yet he could feel the house watching, sensing, anticipating. Each footfall stirred dust, faint vibrations that traveled through the walls like messages. He reached the edge of the hidden passage, peering into the black void. A metallic glimmer caught his eye, the faint reflection of a coin spinning slightly. His breath caught. The same warning symbol stared up at him, overlapping triangles within a circle. Suddenly, a whisper rose from the walls, almost human, almost mechanical. The observer sees. The observed moves. Truth must be revealed. Aaron froze, understanding the implication. The house itself was judging him, calculating whether he could comprehend its mechanisms, whether he could survive the knowledge of its memory. He realized then that Evelyn was both his guide and his test. Her calm demeanor was part of the house's influence. She was the buffer between him and complete destruction. The only human element capable of interpreting the machine's will. From somewhere below, a faint grinding began again, slow, deliberate, inexorable. The floorboards shivered under their feet. The parlor seemed to contract and expand, the walls breathing, as if alive. Aaron understood. The house had not finished recording, not finished judging. Evelyn turned toward him, her eyes grave. The final witness will appear soon, and when it does, the truth of all our actions will be known. Aaron's pulse raced. He sensed the climax approaching, the final convergence of human obsession and mechanical judgment. Something or someone was coming. The walls themselves seemed to lean closer, listening. The hum rose into a sharp, high-pitched note. The silver coin on the floor vibrated subtly, rolling toward the baseboard. Aaron bent to pick it up, and in that moment, a cold, deliberate hand touched his shoulder. He spun, gun raised, and froze. No one was there, yet a voice, low and metallic, whispered through the plaster, carrying a weight beyond comprehension. The apprentice is revealed, the architect is judged, and the killer walks among you. Aaron felt his blood run cold. The mansion's judgment was imminent. The final witness was about to emerge. The mansion had grown quieter, yet the silence was not comforting. Detective Aaron Holt could feel it. The walls themselves seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, each vibration a subtle warning. The silver coin he had picked up earlier lay heavy in his palm, the symbol catching the faint light of the flickering bulb above. Overlapping triangles in a circle. Forgive nothing. Evelyn Grant moved beside him, graceful and alert. Her eyes darted to the walls, the ceiling, the floorboards, as if reading invisible signals in the house's structure. Holt could no longer tell where she ended and the mansion began. She was part of its machinery now, a human conduit for the judgment embedded in copper, steel, and plaster. Detective, she said quietly. The final witness will appear soon. The house does not reveal itself lightly. It waits until all conditions are met. Holt swallowed hard. The killer. You said the machine killed Robert Miles, but someone had to activate it. Someone had to design the trap. Who is responsible? Evelyn. Tell me the truth. Her lips pressed in a thin line. The apprentice is not always the executor. The mind that corrupts the machine. That is someone else. Someone patient. Someone who understood the house far better than either Robert or the first. Holt's pulse quickened. His gaze swept the parlor. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting across the walls. The hum from below began again, faint at first, then rising steadily, like a heartbeat amplified. The mansion was alive, and it was expecting him to see clearly. A floorboard creaked behind the fireplace. Holt raised his gun, stepping forward cautiously. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow tunnel. Within he could see a faint silhouette. Someone crouched, waiting. "Show yourself," Holt demanded, voice steady but low. The figure emerged slowly. It was a man older than Robert Miles had been, hair streaked with gray, hands steady and precise. He wore a long coat that blended with the shadows, eyes cold and calculating. "Detective Holt," the man said, voice smooth and calm. "I've been expecting you." Holt's mind raced. He recognized the face immediately. William Reddick, the original architect of the mansion's mechanisms. It couldn't be. He had disappeared decades ago. "You're alive," Holt managed. Reddick smiled faintly. "Of course. The house has been my sanctuary, my laboratory." Robert thought he could control it. Evelyn thought she could guide it. Both were naive. "I am the one who understands every lock, every pulse, every memory embedded in these walls. I am the killer you seek." Holt's hand trembled slightly on the gun. You set all of this in motion." "Robert, Evelyn, the traps." Reddick nodded. "Every design, every sequence of failures. I orchestrated it carefully. My apprentice thought she had the power. She only believes she does. The mansion chooses its victims. I merely ensure the conditions are correct." From the walls, a hum rose to a sharp resonance. Holt's eyes darted around. The mansion was reacting, vibrating in acknowledgement of Reddick's presence. Evelyn stepped forward, voice firm. "You're the true architect of death, William. Your obsession became the chain that binds all of us." Reddick's gaze met hers. "I am the witness to human folly. The house is my instrument." Robert overreached. Evelyn overestimated herself. "You, detective, are merely the final test." The hum grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards. Holt could feel the walls leaning inward, the air thick with electricity and expectation. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, yet there was no exit. The mansion had sealed itself. Reddick's lips curved into a faint, grin smile. "Now you see the truth. The killer was not an apprentice, nor a single human. The house, guided by decades of obsession, judged Robert Miles. But the mind behind its design, the one who understood its memory and its will, that was me. I am the killer." Holt's breath caught. His gaze darted to Evelyn. She looked calm, yet there was an edge of fear in her eyes, the fear of someone who realizes that even the guardian can be outmaneuvered. Reddick stepped closer. "Do not fear me. Fear the house. It remembers, it judges, and it will act against anyone who disregards its rules. I merely set the stage." A sudden metallic clatter echoed from the walls, followed by the hum rising into a deafening resonance. Holt's gun hand shook violently. The mansion seemed to pulse alive and omniscient. Reddick's voice, calm but insistent, cut through the chaos. "The apprentice guided the machine. I orchestrated the circumstances. Now, detective, it is your turn. Will you survive its judgment?" Holt's eyes darted to the bedroom door. Still humming faintly, the mansion had prepared its final witness, and the killer stood before him, decades of obsession, brilliance, and cold calculation embodied in a man who had hidden in plain sight. The walls whispered again, metallic and human at once. The observer must move. The truth will be seen. Aaron Holt realized that the house would not allow him to leave until he had understood fully, until he had faced the architect, the apprentice, and the silent judgment embedded in every floorboard and wall. And somewhere deep beneath the mansion, the gears began to turn again, slow, deliberate, inexorable. The mansion had not finished its work. The mansion seemed to close in on Detective Aaron Holt as he stood in the parlor, flanked by Evelyn Grant and the long-hidden architect, William Reddick. The air pulsed with the hum of gears, the faint hiss of hydraulic mechanisms, the low whisper of a house that remembered every detail of every life it had encountered. The room felt alive, sentient, as if every wall, every floorboard, every seam of plaster were part of a massive, calculating mind. Aaron's eyes darted between Evelyn and Reddick, struggling to untangle the threads of human and mechanical agency. Robert Miles was dead. The traps had claimed him. The silver coins had been warnings. The house had judged him. But the true puppeteer, the mind orchestrating the judgment, had been elusive, until now. Reddick's calm, unblinking gaze met Aaron's. You've seen the mechanism, the devices, the traps. You understand now, don't you? The machine does not kill on its own. It executes the intentions embedded within it by those who understand its design. Evelyn's eyes flickered. He's right. Robert underestimated the system. He tampered. He triggered failures. But he also underestimated me. I thought I could guide it safely. I couldn't control it entirely. Aaron's mind raced. The room, the machine, the silent witness in the walls, the mansion had been designed to judge human hubris. But there was still something he hadn't understood. The air shifted, a faint metallic resonance vibrating through the floorboards beneath their feet. Then a single, deliberate click echoed from the wall behind him. Holt spun, gun raised as a hidden panel slid open to reveal nothing, just shadows. But the whisper came again, low and chilling. The guilty hand cannot escape. Aaron realized with a sinking certainty what he hadn't seen before. He turned toward Evelyn, who met his gaze calmly, but with a trace of fear. And then it hit him. The apprentice, the guide, the human interface. She had been protecting something, someone. He studied Reddick again. The architect was meticulous, brilliant, and patient, but he had been hiding in plain sight. Every puzzle piece, every trap, every coin had originated from him. Yet there was a detail he had overlooked. The timing of the machine's actions. The final move, the execution of judgment, required a human decision, an action deliberate enough to trigger the mechanism. Aaron's pulse raced. He turned back to Evelyn. You set the final trap, he said slowly. Robert's death. The rooms. The sealed doors. You completed it. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. I guided it. I monitored it. But the intention, the design, yes, I made sure it worked as he would have feared. I ensured the judgment was executed. I did not kill him personally, but I made the system unavoidable. Aaron's eyes narrowed. The pieces fell into place. Evelyn was not just the apprentice, she was the executor. Reddick had designed the house, Robert had meddled, but Evelyn had finished it. She had wielded the mansion's mechanisms to complete the cycle of judgment. You are the killer, Aaron said softly, the realization heavy. Evelyn's gaze met his. For the first time, she faltered almost imperceptibly. I am the final hand. I am the one the house trusts to act when all else fails. I did not take the life personally, but I made sure the house judged properly. Robert is dead because I allowed the system to finish what was set in motion. Aaron swallowed, the magnitude of it sinking in. The human mind, the machine, and the house itself had merged into a single entity, and Evelyn had been its hand, its will, its final executor. The hum of the walls shifted, lowering to a soft, satisfied tone. The mansion seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging its judgment had been carried out correctly. Reddick watched, expression unreadable. It is done. The apprentice has proven herself. The system functions as intended. Aaron's gun remained raised, but he felt the futility. There was no traditional crime scene here, no conventional justice. The mansion had its own rules, its own jury, and Evelyn had become its instrument. A final vibration shuddered through the floorboards. The silver coin in Aaron's pocket vibrated faintly, as if alive. He looked at Evelyn. She nodded once, faintly acknowledging the unspoken truth. The killer was not the architect. The killer was the apprentice. Outside, the rain had stopped. The storm clouds broke, letting a single shaft of morning light touch the mansion's roof. But inside, the darkness of obsession, judgment, and meticulous design remained. Eternal. Aaron lowered his gun. The mansion had passed its verdict. The house had remembered, and Evelyn had executed it. The final witness was the silent, mechanical consciousness embedded in the walls, and the killer walked among them, unseen yet fully revealed. The room was still. The mansion waited. And the lesson remained. Obsession leaves a mark, and the deadliest traps are not those that kill instantly, but those that judge relentlessly. with the hand of a human mind guided by the will of a machine.